Welcome to the Dark Fantasy panel, in which we will talk about dark fantasy. Dark fantasy has become very popular in recent years. You could say it's never been unpopular. It's always had its ups and downs, and we'll talk about what makes it interesting, what makes it interesting to read, what makes it interesting to write. Because this is our very first guest of honor panel with Charles Goss, our guest of honor, who writes a series with the very innocent-sounding name, The Laundry. That sounds like the sort of place you go to clean your clothes, Charlie. Why is there eldritch horror in something about cleaning your clothes?
Well, okay, first confession, I did not name it The Laundry Files. It's just a diktat came down from head office of an American publisher saying all book series with more than 3 titles must have a series title for purposes of putting it on Amazon. What are you going to call it, Charlie? I suggest The Laundry Files. Do you disagree? This was my executive editor, so I knuckled under. The reason The Laundry got that name is because, per the series, it was originally an intelligence agency set up in London during the Second World War, and its first offices were above a Chinese laundry in Soho. And the name stuck. As with so many of these institutions, names have meaning, and there's always been something slightly sleazy and smelly about it anyway, a bit like somebody's unwashed laundry. But yeah, if you're looking for tips on how to do your ironing better, it's the wrong series of books to read.
So the question is, you write a wide variety of books. That's why we have 2 very different genres covered in your 2 different panels. One is dark fantasy, and the other one is various ways of looking at the future. What made you decide to go into the Lovecraft part of the writing world?
I'm not sure whether it's even primarily Lovecraftian, but what started it? I've always had a sort of weakness for the British spy thriller, the classic Cold War spy thriller. Think John le Carré, think Len Deighton. It's one of the things I've regretted is I'm too young to have had a chance to actually write classic spy thrillers because the Cold War ended and sort of made them a bit less. No, the spy thriller drew a lot of its power in the post-war period from the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Putin's working on it, don't worry.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I came up with in the 90s was a Lovecraftian story called The Colder War, which made Lovecraft scary again by linking Cthulhu, etc., to the threat of nuclear annihilation. It was a sequel to At the Mountains of Madness, in which we posit that the artifacts of the Elder Race are grabbed by various Western powers and used as weapons during the Cold War. Because, you know, plush Cthulhu bedroom slippers sort of devalue the ancient cosmic gibbering horror, but having your face burned off by nuclear weapons detonated by vast cool intelligences on the other side of the world over some abstruse ideological dispute you don't even understand is pretty horrific. And when I sat down to write my spy thriller series, I suddenly realised, yeah, you want to raise the stakes. Instead of nuclear annihilation, have it cosmic dread and occupation by tentacle monsters eating your face. So yeah, Lovecraftian horror is an excellent fit for spy thrillers. And somewhere along the lines, Lovecraftian horror angle sort of crawled all over the spy thriller set, and that's where The Laundry Files came from.
My question is to all 3 panelists, from Charlie on down. Why do you think is dark fiction's enduring appeal?
Well, I can say that to me, I like fantasy and dark fantasy. Well, probably because, yeah, I like it when they take the world, our familiar world, and in insert into it all kinds of dark, sinister elements and make it a little bit different. And I really like when they make it just a little bit different. Well, I just had a big headbang with the stage, so I'm not going to say much. I would take it from here. I'll jump in later.
Your forehead is getting redder and blubbier.
Yes, thank you for that.
I'm just updating you.
So, yeah, that's why I like dark fantasy, and I have more things to say. I'll say them later. Sorry.
Yeah, there's. I agree with Marnie. There's the element of our world, but there are shadows that follow us in that world, and you might not want to look into them because whatever looks back from the shadows is not very nice. And that's one aspect of it that speaks to me. And the other one is that at a certain point, let's call it the Tolkien-esque fantasy, or the high fantasy, where you have evil battling good, gets a bit boring, to me at least. And this is a different kind of fantasy that it's more subtle. It can be, if written well, it can be a bit more sophisticated and more interesting, and it's more of a fantasy about people and less about, I don't know, archetypes in a way. So it makes it more approachable and easier to relate to.
Can I take a step now? Please. Okay. Dark fantasy, let's start with a bit of a definition. Let's call it fantasy with added elements of horror. Now, what is horror? To give you an example of what I mean by asking that question, editor Nick Mamadis once posed a question on his blog. Which of these stories is more horrifying? Tentacle monsters invade and rip people's heads off, and there's blood everywhere and blood up the walls and axe murderers and mayhem? Or we have a family gathered together in a hospital room around a bed. And there's a woman in the bed, the mother of the kids gathered around, and machines going beep, and a ventilator, and a rather quiet doctor, and what we're seeing is a struggle going on inside the head of her eldest son because they've run out of the insurance money, and he's having to decide whether or not to turn off the ventilator. Which of these is more dreadful and horrifying, really? And the latter isn't the sort of thing you write the short story about as a rule. If you did, it would be called a mainstream story. But the former is the thing people queue up to read. Why is that? It's far less realistic and far less plausible, and it's the sort of thing that you know really can't actually happen to you. Now, I want to veer off a little and talk about the nature of horror as a fictional form. We talk about genres such as science fiction or fantasy or spy thrillers, but these are actually fairly badly defined in some ways because you can mix and match them. And certain things that are marketed as genres in bookstores and libraries aren't really. They're actually tones or colour filters we can apply to other forms of fiction. For example, you can take any genre you like and add a romance plot. If you make the romance plot the whole point of the story, what you end up with is only really marketable as romance, but you can put romance into a spy thriller or into a science fiction novel or a historical novel. You can do what the hell you want with it. You can just add it the amount you want to change the tone of a story. You can do the same thing with horror. Horror is a tint. You can take horror and add it to fantasy or to urban fantasy, in which case you have dark fantasy. You can add it to science fiction, in which case you get Alien. You can add it to a spy thriller, in which case maybe you get parts of the Laundry Files. You can add it to a straight coming-of-age story set in Middle America, in which case you get Stephen King. The point is, again, horror is a tint or tone you apply over some other genre of fiction. to give an extra effect. And you know, it's interesting that the essential tint type things that we often talk of as genres are horror and romance. I'd like also, just to define the other genres, loosely speaking, a fantasy novel is a fantasy novel if you can't tell the story after you take out the magic of the dragons. It's not a viable story if you take them out. Then it has to be a fantasy story. A science fiction story, if you try and tell the story from The Time Machine by H.G. Wells without time travel, you don't have a story left. So again, it's science fiction. But you could take the horror or the romance out of a novel in one of these genres, and you're still left with the underlying novel, usually.
Yeah, well, you're left with a novel. I'm not sure if you're, certainly in the case of a King novel, I don't know how much of the plot you've got there.
It's a pretty boring plot, frankly, if you take the horror out of it.
Yeah. One brand of dark fantasy that's been increasingly popular in recent years, and I was interested about what you said about it being more realistic, is what they call grimdark, which is basically horror added to epic fantasy, I would say. Would you pretty much agree with that?
In theory, I generally avoid anything labelled grimdark, like the plague.
Yeah, as do I, which is my problem with what Ehud said about, is darker more realistic?
No, go on.
I don't know. My feeling is that it is. Maybe it's because I'm not a huge fantasy fan. And some people are gonna wanna crucify me for this, but I find Tolkien boring.
Yay!
So, and Tolkien-esque stories tend to do this to me, and if you get a bit grittier, if you get a bit darker, it becomes less of a fable and more of a story to me. At least that's how I feel.
Well, I would agree with partly with Ehud, because I don't find Tolkien boring, but I find most Tolkien followers extremely boring. And personally, I prefer science fiction or fantasy on dark fantasy. For some reason, horror and dark fantasy are not really doing it to me. That's why, as a publisher, you may have noticed I don't think I've published any dark fantasy so far, right?
I would categorize Carol Burke's
I thought you might say that.
As quite dark. There's about...
Well, it's really cruel. It's cruel fantasy, really,
yeah,
if there's such a definition.
I'm sorry, if you've got your protagonist tortured by demons for 200 pages,
yes,
dark
okay.
fantasy.
Well, I have published dark fantasy, it seems, but apparently what attracted me in those particular books were other stuff. So I guess if they've got really good characters and good plot lines, then I don't care if it's dark fantasy or any other kind of fantasy. Yep. Anything you want to add to that, Charlie?
Yeah, I'll also add, in addition to dark fantasy, you could argue a lot of urban fantasy should be dark.
Yeah.
And currently urban fantasy appears to be crashing in the United States. 2 years ago, an editor, just on lunch with, turned to me and said, just said cuttingly, urban fantasy is dead. But what about the laundry files? Oh, that isn't urban fantasy. Huh? It's contemporary, it's fantasy, it has magic in it.
And it's urban.
And it's urban. No, it's not urban fantasy. Urban fantasy, you know urban fantasy, it's the woman vampire hunter with the tattoo on the small of her back and the sword, whose boyfriend is a werewolf and her other boyfriend is a vampire, and that's urban fantasy. And apparently this is dead and it's collapsing in the American market right now. But yeah, it would probably work an awful lot better if it was grimdark. Too much of it is twee. Sparkly unicorns and friendly vampires who twinkle in the twilight and have an affair with a protagonist. No. Vampires are hideous disease metaphors. They're either about sexually transmitted diseases, or they're about rape, or they're about death.
Well, if you look at the aforementioned Sparky Vampire, about which I know quite a bit despite never reading the books or watching the movies.
I read the Wikipedia synopsis, that was bad enough.
Yeah, I actually consider him quite a dark character because he is stalkery. I mean, it's not an accident that the biggest byproduct of the Twilight books is the 50 Shades of Grey series, another series about a terrible, terrible, terrible relationship.
Yeah. No, earlier, one of you mentioned, horror and realism. Actually, yeah, I think one of the things we read horror for is a sense of catharsis and a sense of, well, actually, it takes us out of a real world, but these are horrors that are survivable. In reality, we are all going to die, and we're probably going to die alone and in pain, especially if we live long enough to avoid car crashes or gunshot wounds. We're just going to die of old age. And old age, if you posit a far future space operatic setting in which everybody is immortal, and you described the process of dying of old age, it would be a really hideous form of long drawn out torture. It's my 52nd birthday today, and I'm feeling I'm trying to remember who it was who described marriage as finding the one person you most love in the world and having to watch them grow old and die horribly. That's a romance novel, by the way.
Yep, that is what that is.
So yeah, grimdark romance is the next big thing. You heard it here first.
We've had in recent months a real-life phenomena of scary clowns. Is real life imitating horror to a degree that makes horror redundant?
Have you checked politics lately, especially across the Atlantic?
Oh yeah, because you have to go far from here to find horrible politics.
Or far from where I live. Frankly, I want to send this year back for a refund, maybe sue the manufacturer as well.
We did talk about it yesterday.
Yeah.
We want to get David Bowie back and give them someone. Never mind.
Yeah. It's you know what they said about a country song? That if you play it in reverse, you get your dog back, your wife back, your apartment back, your job back. We need to play 2016 in reverse, maybe. I'm wondering about this popularity of dark. I wonder how much of it has to do specifically with George R.R. Martin in recent years, and how much do you think is more of a general trend?
Okay, confession time. I'm a huge George R.R. Martin fan who has not read the Westeros books, and as I don't watch TV drama, I'm completely immune to Game of Thrones. When I say I'm a huge George R.R. Martin fan, I'm a huge fan of his science fiction and his earlier works, and he's a morbid, sick puppy, as anyone who's read A Song for Fire or Sand Kings can attest.
Sand King is deeply disturbing.
So it's no surprise whatsoever that when he decided to do high fantasy, he would make it deeply disturbing and unpleasant in places. But there are other authors who I think have been doing it before Game of Thrones really took off. As I understand it was a very slow burn. The first book was published in the mid-90s. It took a decade for him to get the television show actually optioned and into production, and longer to come out with it.
Yeah,
I should also
by
add,
that time it was really popular.
It was really popular, but only in book form. It has taken over in popularity as a fantasy series from The Tank Track of Time, shall we say? The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, because he died and ain't writing them anymore. Yeah, but the thing is, yeah, he certainly popularised it on a large scale. I should also add to anyone in the audience who isn't aware of this, for George to get the TV show made, it helped enormously that he was the head scriptwriter for a Hollywood sitcom for a decade. He was an industry insider. Most of us don't have anything like that level of input into the process, so, you know. I can't remember his title.
He wrote Beauty and the Beast before.
Yeah, but he also worked on a sitcom in addition to Beauty and the Beast. In Beauty and the Beast, he was more of he was a producer as well as a writer. Yeah, you know the genesis, of course, of Game of Thrones is, okay, I'm done with this TV stuff. TV is terrible. I'm going to write something no one's ever going to be able to film. So, yeah. Life, but yeah, I published the Game of Thrones books when I was at Opus, and the first one sat on the shelves for a year. No one bought it, and then we published the Legends anthology, edited by Robert Silverberg, and that had a Martin story set in the same world, and people loved that, and suddenly the book started selling, and then the second book came out, and people were crazy about that, and the third is I think where it really hit.
Sorry, just Beauty and the Beast, Twilight Zone, the second series from the 1980s, and The Outer Limits.
I'm sure he had more credits.
Oh, maybe School of Thrones.
No.
Three episodes.
That's something else.
Yep.
Okay, anyway, prior form for script writing, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and quite a bit of industry experience. Now, question I wanted to ask, and this one is a bit more relevant to Ronnie, because you also publish another dark fantasy. Have published, which is the Cassandra Clare series.
Which is also a YA series.
Yes, and I wanted to ask about YA getting darker in various ways. You know, from cancer stories by John Green to scary demons.
But John Green is not really fantasy, but it is getting dark.
YA.
No, he's YA and he's dark.
Yeah.
Hunger Games? Hunger Games isn't exactly a bundle of laughs.
Yeah, exactly. So why is YA getting so dark?
When has it not been
Well,
dark?
maybe because, you know, I talk to a lot of young adults. Some of them are in my own family. And what I find out that compared to me, I don't want to say us, they're interested in more dark subjects. They are into it. You can see it in many aspects of their own lives. Not everybody, but many of them. You can see it in makeup, you can see it in the way they dress, in the movies they go to.
Goth peaked in the 80s.
Goth has not yet peaked, it just turned brown and leathery and turned into steampunk.
And if you look at recent fantasy YA books, you do see that it is getting darker. I think one that I didn't publish, but that I read a few years ago, I don't know if any of you remembers, Tender Morsels by Margot Lanigan. She's an Australian writer. The beginning of that book, it was hard to continue even as an adult because it describes a terrible rape. And I was thinking, this is a YA book. And you know, just now I came back a few months ago from the International YA Book Fair in Italy, in Bologna, and many of the books that were suggested to me, some of them I might publish, were very dark. One is taking place in a cemetery, an Australian book. Another one is about two young lovers. It's not even another one, it's another three because it's a trilogy. Two young lovers who die at the beginning of the series and then come back to life and then die again and die again and die again until they succeed to do something. And this is one of the lighter books that were suggested. to me. Not to mention the Swedish...
So it's Dead Groundhog Day?
Not really, it's not funny. No humor. No humor in it.
Dead depressing
But,
Groundhog Day.
no, but lots of romance in it.
Okay.
Because they do love each other a lot.
Romeo and Juliet in hell.
Yes. Actually, Romeo and Juliet, if you mention that, in a way, it is a YA story. Because they were... It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh yeah,
If it was published today, it would have probably been published as YA, and probably John Green would have written it. Yeah, I read, I was suggested a Swedish YA thriller about a young girl that at the beginning of the book is kidnapped, buried in a coffin while still being alive, and then everybody is looking for her in the snow while being very, very green and sad. No fantasy in it, though.
Yeah,
And this is, she said, this is really good for YA. It's really popular in Sweden.
Yeah, this is another thing I wanted to bring up, which is Scandinavian fiction, both in literature and in various TV shows, with of course the girl with the dragon tattoo being probably the most famous, is incredibly dark.
And incredibly popular.
Yes. Do you think it's having an effect on culture and literature overall, or do you think its popularity is a result of trends in popular fiction?
The latter. I mean, I put a chunk of the popularity of hideous, grim endings in YA stuff and dystopian fiction down to the way the younger generation in the West generally, I don't know how it is in Israel, but how they feel they've been screwed over completely by the generation born between about 1945 and 1965, who own all the property, drove all the house prices up, and took all the good jobs. Anyone who's less than about 40 years old feels hideously ripped off by their parents' generation. You know, to the extent that fiction, trends in fiction popularity reflect the concerns of the readers, if you're young and you're looking for fiction about how you might live in the future or how things are going to go, you're not looking forward to a split-level ranch house on Mars and a flying car. You're looking forward to working, if you're lucky, in McDonald's, while ruled over by Donald Trump.
Interesting that in light of that all of this dark fiction, so much of it emanates from Scandinavia, where, you know, things aren't that bad, except it's really cold, but the social network is still in place.
Yeah, but they very much have the grim Scandinavian outlook on life. It's the whole northern thing. You know, it's been said the national sport of Finland is drinking yourself to death on akvavit.
Go to WorldCon next year. It's gonna be cheerful.
It shades over into a Russian outlook, and well, we even get a bit of it in Scotland. I mean, if you want true grimdark, you need to read some of Ian Banks's mainstream novels.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to start by recommending The Wasp Factory,
Yeah.
which was grotesquely mismarketed as mainstream literary fiction and caused the Irish Times book reviewer to faint in horror and then declare in a review in a newspaper of record that this book should be burnt and the author prosecuted. Made it a bestseller.
Yeah, that one was, you'll probably remember, that was published in Hebrew, right?
Yes, it was. It was actually, I read it when I was 16 or 17, and I thought, whoa, it was so good. Oh, it was really scary. Also, I don't remember who wrote it. The Seventh Garden, you remember that one? British book by, I don't remember who wrote it. Very dark, about a few children that lost their parents and they buried them in the backyard under the cement. And then they have to stay all of their own. It was kind of a YA book. Well, it was.
I don't read that much YA. I was actually banned by somebody from reading and commenting about YA because they said, I don't get it, and So I don't have that much to say specifically about YA, but I think, like Charlie, that it is the Scandinavian Renaissance, shall we call it in English, does have to. It's a symptom. It's not a generator of trends, and not a generator of trends, and maybe the social. From the little I read, maybe the social network there is not enough, because they are facing some dire. They are facing some dire might face some dire economic future. So maybe that's the outlook that comes into this. But yeah, it's the northern thing. Not enough flight, man.
I remember when the first Worldcon I attended, 2005, I think you were on that panel, Didi. I came in and I remember the Swedish translator of something was talking about something in Swedish literature, and he said, well, it's all grim and grim and grim and dark and grim. You remember that?
Yeah,
and he had a very special accent.
Yeah, that was a translation panel I was in the 2005 Worldcon, moderated by Sir Terry Pratchett, because he thought it would be interesting to moderate that discussion. He had questions. And there was a Swedish translator and a German translator, and they both made the same point, which is, in our countries, popular fiction is not really a done thing, and certainly not anything that's as flighty as science fiction or fantasy. So nobody writes it here, so we have to translate it. That was interesting. But
coming to think of it, I mean, I myself published more dark fantasy for YA, not only Cassandra Clare. Just now, I published White Cat by Holly Black, which is a fascinating book, but it's totally dark fantasy. The protagonist is a young boy who finds out, I'm not going to spoil the book, but let's just say that everybody is having a field day on his expense in his family. That's all I'm going to say. Of course, he's doing something about it, but it's very dark, full of dark dreams. One of them is dreaming of a white cat all the time, and then it turns out that...
Spoiler.
Yeah.
It's not just that. You can find it... It's not that grim, but it is dark. If you take Diana Wynne Jones' the Homeward Bounders.
Yeah.
Which
very
is
dark.
Yeah.
Which I also publish. Yeah, I do publish dark.
You do publish dark fantasy.
I just didn't think about it that way.
Dark fantasy.
Yes.
You get a 12-year-old kid. You toss him into a different universe, and you basically throw the weight of the entire existence on his shoulders.
And he might never come home.
Yeah, and again, you just published We Are All Completely Fine by Darren Gregory, which is not a YA.
Yeah.
It is dark. It is Lovecraftian, and he's now writing. He's written one. He's now writing two more books, which are YA in that universe.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say.
They're YA prequels.
They are YA prequels.
Exactly. Yeah.
Going back a little bit further now, I think about it, Philip Pullman's The Golden Spyglass?
Yeah, the whole trilogy.
The whole trilogy, yeah.
His,
he sort of got sidetracked.
dark materials is dark is in the title.
He got sidetracked a little bit into a theological argument and having a revolution and overthrowing the kingdom of heaven to replace it with a republic, which is an interesting idea, but slightly off the beaten track from where he started out, which was really going rather grim.
Yeah, but Pullman wrote his series as a direct and intentional answer to Narnia in the same way that China Miéville wrote Perdita Street Station as a response to Tolkien.
And as a real response to Narnia, a much better, fully formed one, although it's not a young adult, The Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman.
Oh, I love that.
Which is a total response to Narnia and to
Harry Potter.
And it slaughters them mercilessly.
Yes, I loved it so much.
I started The Magicians, and I at certain points said, I don't like you, Quentin, and I don't want to spend any more time with you. I'm done with this book.
Well, yeah, you're meant to read it while wanting to slap Quentin around and slap some sense into him. For most of the trilogy, he finally gets his shit together in the third book.
Yeah, I have been told this.
But it's a beautiful example of using an unsympathetic narrator as a viewpoint into a really hideous crapsack world. And the only redeeming feature for Quentin for much of it is that everyone around him is even worse. Yeah.
My next question, which again harkens back to your own writing, is while you write fantasy that can get pretty dark, you also infuse it with humor. And
well, yeah, but humour is also another matter of tone. For an example, look at the movie Dr. Strangelove. It's hysterically funny. It's also utterly terrifying if you think about it. It's a movie about the Third World War and the end of the world from about 1962? 61. Yeah, the climax of it is where, was it the American Secretary of State who shouts loudly, "Gentlemen, no fighting in the war room."
And they annihilate the world, while in the soundtrack there is a really happy song.
Dame Vera Lynn singing "We'll Meet Again," which is a really popular love song from the Second World War, to a background of mushroom clouds.
And a man riding a bomb. Yes.
A cowboy riding a bomb.
Yes, Dr. Strangelove. Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. That's...
Hey, but that was Stanley Kubrick. Have you ever seen Clockwork Orange?
I have, yes.
It was full of humor. Dark humor, but full of humor.
I think humor is a wonderful tool to emphasize darkness.
Yeah.
It
Contrast.
it contrasts.
Humor is a contrast medium.
Yeah, and you laugh and you think, oh my God, I can't believe I'm laughing at this, which is a great thing if you can achieve it.
Yeah. The Laundry Files is, to some extent, meant to be humour, but there was that one email I got from my agent when I sent her the first draft of the Fuller Memorandum, saying, "Charlie, I was up reading this until 3 a.m. last night. It was really gripping. It's brilliantly well written. But, oh dear God, you can't let them eat the babies' faces. Your readers will hate you. Don't do it. It'll be career suicide." My response, "Caitlin, I submit that as the mother of 4 toddlers, you might have a slight personal stake here. Can we refer this to for a tiebreaker to the British editor, who is a father of 2, but who also likes horror?" My agent's never really got horror.
This actually reminds me of Douglas Adams, who wrote one book with kind of a positive outlook. The first Derek Gently book is, if you strip it to the bones, not incredibly depressing. It is the only Douglas Adams book which, if you strip it to the bones, is not incredibly depressing. And quite a bit of Pratchett's writing as well is quite dark.
Yep. Laughing Past the Graveyard. There's a reason I dedicated the most recent laundry novel to Terry Pratchett for showing us how it's done. Massacring thousands of people and getting the reader to laugh helplessly with you.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the article Neil Gaiman wrote about him, in which he said his defining characteristic is that he is angry. And, that's one of his best friends. So, yeah. I'm not sure how we're doing for time. We're doing okay for time. I'm drawing a blank. My brain's gone.
I'm the one who had the accident.
Yeah, I slept less than 3 hours. I'll be more coherent on Thursday's panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to an audience question, and that'll help my brain return, really.
You keep saying, well, it's north, it's dark because it's north, and there's not enough light, but is it really that different here? We have plenty of sun in it since Obasa. We took Sense of Wonder and made it Sense of Bummer.
Sense of Bummer. It's really easy to
Bummer. It sounds better in Hebrew.
And most stories written here are really sort of depressing as well. So
yeah, we have, I would say, extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, but I'm trying to say, is there a culture that you know of where it's all, you know, unicorns and wonderful and happy, or is it a global trend of darkness?
Global trend.
But I'd want to argue that while some, I wouldn't say that all, but some of what is written here might be depressing, it's not dark. It's not what you might call, there is stuff, there's...
It's not, if I may, it's not unrelentingly dark,
yeah,
in the way the Scandinavian fiction is.
גרטלד בשלב האישה של יעל פורמן, that is dark fantasy. It's funny dark fantasy, but that's basically dark fantasy. I am struggling to think of other stuff that I can pinpoint to them and say, yeah, that's dark. That I'd have to think about it. We can find it, but
the Karen Landsman oeuvre of killing everyone by plague.
Is it dark though? I don't know. I don't feel.
Karen is very cheery about it.
Yeah,
We were sharing diseases over dinner.
Yeah.
With enthusiasm.
I would.
I don't know. I don't. You know. Yeah. Dark thoughts.
You
By men.
one of mine about an addict vampire that I think is dark fantasy.
Yeah, it might be. I may be overstating it a bit, but I don't think there's a lot of what I might call dark fantasy. Even Karen's stuff. It's not. It might be tragic, but it's not dark. I mean, look at Broken Skies. Everybody dies. We can't get the planet is on its way to ruin. We can't even get out to Mars. It's heartbreaking. I wouldn't call it dark, but I don't know. Maybe I'm the wrong person to define it.
Aren't you Mr. Sense-A-Bummer?
Well,
as an editor?
לא, זה רמי.
Yeah, they're kind of both.
Yeah.
They're the Sense-A-Bummer twins.
Well, yeah. I don't like unicorns.
Wait,
really
have you read Charlie's unicorn novella?
Yeah. It's wonderful.
Unless you're right.
You'll never think about unicorns the same way
I
again.
am told by many people that I've spoiled My Little Pony Friendship is Magic for
You didn't, for me, both because I don't watch it and because I had previously read Elizabeth Bear's take on a unicorn, and that was quite frightening as well. It just came out a few years before, so yeah. Unicorns, they're scary.
It's like clowns, only in a unicorn shape.
Yeah. Ronnie, you bumped your head.
So you spoke about the new trend of dark in YA books, and then you talked about Philip Pullman, which is not quite new. And then if we go really back, Peter Pan is quite dark if you read the book and not the Disney movie. So how new exactly is this new dark YA books?
Well, let's actually trace it back a bit further. Grimm's fairy tales.
Yes, I was just about
And
to
he
say
was
that.
codifying older traditions.
They were full
And they were the originals. The originals of the Grimm fairy tales were even worse. Go look up Little Red Riding Hood, the original stories from the 14th century. But don't do it before you go to bed.
And really, Sleeping Beauty, the whole Disney shtick, no, that's revisionism. The real thing was very, very rapey and not in a good way.
There's the Brothers Grimm fantasies actually came out, and they were told to tone it down because it did not sell. I'm serious. That's what happened. What we get is a softer version of a softer version.
Yeah, but in reply to her question, I definitely think that in the mid-20th century and onwards, largely influenced by Disney and by the success of stuff like the Narnia books, which again is one of those things that the deeper you look into, the more depressing it is. But
the Grimm tales, Narnia aren't YA. They do YA.
Grimm is not YA? Narnia is not YA?
Narnia is not YA. What is Narnia? I mean, it predates.
I'm not quite certain. I might be wrong. I might be wrong.
He predates the term YA, so he obviously wasn't thinking, I'm going to write a YA, but it was certainly written for young people.
It was actually Christian propaganda aimed at children.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Which make it even darker.
Tolkien's on fairy tales. He's complaining about Andrew Lang, who is trying to make fairy tales all nice and friendly for kids, and all the villains become deformed. And he quotes J.K. Chesterton, and he says that children, because they're innocent, aren't interested in justice. Adults, because they're guilty, are interested in mercy. So kids want justice. Adults want mercy.
Yeah, by the way, I will posit that Tolkien's writing is quite dark. He does have a father trying to murder his son, for instance. Plus, everyone who isn't white is evil. There's all kinds of problematic, dark things in it.
We had it in the Bible too, by the way, including the father trying to kill his son. Because some murderous monster told him to.
But no one really told Denethor to kill Marathon. He was into it. He really didn't like his kid. He was too nice.
So my question is in general about dark fantasy. You were talking a bit about how from where it came from, its origins, but I would like to ask about the rise of it. To your opinion, is it because of the whole club culture and the whole like stay high and stay happy and stay positive thing as just like something like an overcompensation, or just where do you think this is coming from, like from society, like I don't expect from people's maybe emotions, inner thoughts, like is it just an expression and an outlet, or is it more like a general growing vibe of just something that really grows?
I think we discussed and generally kept including that the world is really dark. And
What do you think?
but Charlie?
I don't think it's a reaction to club culture, but it is a form of escapism from the world around us, just as club culture is. People escape various ways, some of which seem paradoxical. You can escape from how grim the world is by going and taking some Ian dancing till you fall over, or you can escape from the world by reading something about a much, much, much grimmer world, so that when you close the book, you feel relieved to be back in the real world.
Yeah.
One's an upper, one's a downer.
Yeah, one of my best friends loves watching movies and reading books that are considered depressing because they make him feel better about his life. He's not, that's different people, and they're.
Some people say that laugh humor is a defense mechanism against things that scare us. I've read Solid State and The Laundry, and the funniest parts in the books are actually the life in the cubicles, which you feel very intimately familiar with. So perhaps that's the real horror of the books, which I think might be also similar to China Miéville's books, which are very real in how they're scary. Like he defines himself as a Marxist writer, and he writes about social wars and stuff like that. And that's also, so how do you feel about that, and specifically about cyberpunk, which was the old horror of the modern age, which was also very, very real and not...
Cyberpunk was the what now?
Cyberpunk is very scary, it's very grim.
Well, we're sort of living in a bad cyberpunk future now, for real. I remember in late 1999, I woke up one morning with a horrible revelation. I was living in a 150-year-old apartment in Scotland with my then girlfriend, who had bright blue dreadlocks down her arse, eating cheap Korean takeaway food while on the internet and plotting the defection of a software development team to a rival startup company. And if that isn't straight out of a William Gibson novel from the 1980s, I don't know what is. And the revelation that occurred to me was I was living in a cyberpunk future and it sucked. Totally. So yeah, we are basically living in that future, and it stopped being futuristic. And what was the original question? How did this relate to horror?
No.
Listen,
perhaps the
can I
real
just...
horror, the realistic horror,
Yeah.
and not the fantastical. And that's why it works in the modern setting.
Yeah.
That's okay. Elle, do you have something?
No, I want to say, if you think about it, going to work in a cubicle day after day, 9 to 5, if you're lucky and you don't have to do it 6 to 11, it's quite horrifying. Day in, day out, and very depressing. So, a tentacled monster from outer space might be a nice break, which is what you get with laundry files.
Yeah, I'm not willing to discuss just how much of the Atrocity Archives was semi-autobiographical.
And I'll say this about China Mieville being a Marxist writer. China, when he goes to the shower, he's a Marxist showerer. That's a very defining feature. So yeah.
Someday somebody's going to get a doctoral thesis out of comparing and contrasting the approaches to Marxism in the works of China Mieville, brackets Socialist Workers' Party, and Ken MacLeod, brackets, never goes to bed with the same set of ideological beliefs he woke up with. Although to understand Ken, you have to bear in mind he was the son of a lay preacher in the Presbyterian Kirk who went to university, threw off Christianity completely, and caught the first mimetic infection which was doing the rounds, which happened to be Trotskyism. Ken MacLeod.
Cassini division and...
Terrific writer, and does a lot of examining of politics in his work, but that is not today's topic, and we will go to you.
Thank you. So basically, I forgot everything I was going to say.
That's okay, so did we.
I have a question, actually.
Yes, you were also pointing earlier.
Yes, this might seem very out of place, but do you think that, okay, so as a child, my grandpa used to read me the original Grimm fairy tales.
Really?
So I read in Stuart Hitchcock. No, I have to stop talking. Anyways, I remember that when my parents...
Did you consider asking your parents to call social services?
I never did, because I never knew that there is something, because I was so innocent, I was completely incapable of understanding there's something wrong. So, but the point is, when Aleph was out of the house, and when my parents were also out of the house, he would come and they would call him to take care of me. And then he would start reading me these stories. Eventually, I grew up into being me, a terrifying person. And now I'm kind of just, and now all my classmates, like, I'm a person who's usually interested in dark horror, fantasy, and a lot of people in my class would consider, who weren't read this as children. I remember I kept coming to class and telling them how I heard these, and everyone was terrified of me. So my question is, do you think that if we keep reading kids when they're young, these original stories or something even darker, will our fantasy horror grow into something even more horrifying?
This one's for you.
I have one thing to say about that, which is my biggest problem with the Grimm stories is completely separate from the horror, which is that they tend to be object lessons, and they are object lessons that are, shall we say, obsolete. That's I would consider that to be a bigger problem.
Yeah. As for, are we going to see our horror stories getting more horrifying? Well, yeah, it's... Why do curries and highly spiced dishes get hotter over time? Well, people get used to having so much chili in their food, and they want a bit more. Why? A similar phenomenon has happened in microbrewing and beer in America over the past few years, called the bitterness wars. They've become convinced that the only way to grade the quality of a particular type of beer, called an IPA, is how many international bitterness units of bitterness it ranks. And but the result is stuff that is utterly undrinkable. And I think the same can happen in horror, the same can happen in pretty much any other genre. The people who are reading it or consuming it or watching it on TV want better and gorier special effects and more of it.
Yeah, we've certainly seen it in movie horror with the rise of what has come to be called torture porn. You know, the movies like the Saw and Hostel films. You know, with ever more elaborate setups of horrific gore.
It happens.
I think you remembered your question?
Yes. Many genres of horror have death in it. I do not think death is actually, I do not get it. People think death is scary. What if from the dawn of time, people would be immortal? Think about that. What's more scary? Us dying or us being, or everyone being immortal?
You are a young person.
You've got a promising future as a horror author. Actually, something a lot of authors make a beginner's mistake of is assuming that death is frightening. No, death isn't frightening. The process of dying is frightening.
No, but
also, another mistake that people, readers, tend to make is they think that killing a character is the worst thing you can do to it. No. Killing is can be merciful. If you wanna really, if you wanna really make a character suffer, make it confront itself in the truest sense of the way. Take away all pretense and make him look at himself in the mirror like Darren Gregory does, which is why I love him.
I disagree. That's not the only way to do it.
No, it's not. But it's a good way. It's an effective way.
One of the other ways to do it is just embarrass them, excruciatingly. Figure out what their personal psychological weaknesses are, what their self-image is like, and embarrass them. I deliberately, in my last laundry novels, wrote the family dinner party scene from hell.
Yeah, you know, the kind of comedy that relies greatly on embarrassment, for me, gives me the kind of anxiety reaction I don't even get from horror. It's like, okay, I finished my shutter thing.
Would you say that the fantasy genre will go on like a roller coaster, getting darker and darker through the years, or is it just a temporary trend that will maybe disappear in a few years? And moreover, do you think that today, if you want to write a successful fantasy or a sci-fi story, does it have to be dark, or is there a chance for, let's say...
Okay, as an editor, I'll answer the latter. No, there's light successful stuff, there's dark successful stuff, there's all kinds of successful stuff.
Let me also add, publishing is very, very fashion-driven.
Yeah, very cyclical.
Yeah. Right now, in America, and to a lesser extent in the UK, urban fantasy is collapsing. Mm-hmm. Steampunk is still rising, but has virtually never broken through to the mass. Gale Carriage is a notable exception, but mostly it doesn't sell that well. What I am seeing is a huge bubble coming up from self-published, but now with traditional publishers as well, of superhero fiction.
Yeah, superhero fiction is definitely the next thing. The current thing, really.
Yeah, and I think what's going on there is it's also very often quite funny. There's a lot of coming-of-age stuff in it in the young adult sector, and what it's about is, if anything, an antidote to the dystopian and grimdark thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think a lot of it comes from fanfic.
Yep. In fact, confession, I've had to shelve it this year because too much other stuff on my plate, like a space opera I've got to write. But one of the things I've been working on for a while is a superhero thing of my own. Or rather, an inadvertent supervillain thing.
Let's go back to something closer to what you did, and Lovecraftian stuff and its connection to humor. It seemed to be that that in today in pop culture, Lovecraftian things become a satire and parody. They make specifically things that are both Lovecraftian and disgustingly cute. They laugh about it in every case of way. It's no longer a tool for not only a tool for horror, it's also a tool for humor.
Yes. As Nadav said in a previous panel, question is a sentence with a question mark in the end.
Correct.
I'm going to agree with that proposition about the Lovecraftian stuff being turned into the butt of the joke by pointing to fear of alien invasion in the 1950s in American SF and the movie Mars Attacks from the mid-1990s. Same processes at work.
So what I'm trying to say is Lovecraftian things is still horror, or is it just a flavor you add to your humor?
No, there's Lovecraftian horror being written. Victor LaVale's Black Tom is a recent example. Cassandra Cow had Hammers on Bone published last week. That's a Lovecraftian horror novella.
There's a Rufana Emrys novel in a similar vein coming from tour later this year. I forget its title. That's a revisionist Lovecraftian one, and it is a horror novel. It's also one told from the point of view of one of the deep ones. And the true Lovecraftian monsters in it are the humans.
What Lovecraft did, I think, from the outset is to create, call it playground, and invite other people to play in it. He shared his world with other writers from the beginning, and
I think it was one of the earlier.
And what we see today from those what's it called, Deepwater Bride, which was a Lovecraftian lesbian romance story, which was a great story, and it was nominated for the Nebula Award last year. And he created this playground was created in such a way that you can do anything you like in it, and that's one of the reasons that it's so popular, and one of the reasons that it's still 80 years after his death, we're still writing in his world.
And also, but also, and I think this is important to say about Lovecraft, a lot of the Lovecraftian related stuff being written today is an answer to Lovecraft's problems.
Yeah.
His extreme racism, his misogyny, his hatred of basically everyone
who wasn't
wasn't him or similar to him. Again, I mentioned Black Tom. That's
I didn't talk about new stories that invent new Lovecraftian mythos. I'm talking about things that revoke the more older one, things that appear.
So you're saying so is your question, are jokes about Lovecraft the only jokes about Lovecraft? Because that's what it sounds like, and we're gonna move on. Next question. No, it's not a question, so yeah.
No, what I was asking is the original Lovecraftian?
He's been dead for 80 years. Yes. He cannot write anymore. People are writing everything in his world, everything, not just jokes.
That which is dead but dreaming may yet rise, and this goes for H.P. Lovecraft too.
Yes, definitely.
Scared now? way scarier than any of his monsters. Yuda.
So since to shift from the Lovecraft stuff, so you've also written Singularity or cyberpunk / Singularity kind of things. Some of which
we have another panel in 2 days. It's going to talk about the future.
I know. So but I know that. The question is, there's an interface. I mean, for instance, some of them, especially Glasshouse, has a world that is both, it's it's Singularity, and it's incredibly, totally super dark. The question is, how much of that is, like, is that what you feel like an inevitable development of technology? Like, or is it just because it's fun to write really dark things and people will read them, or whatever?
Bit of both. Okay, quick tour of a subject. A problem with the Singularity is it's what you get when you start asking questions about intelligences that are vastly more powerful than we are. Wait, and the horror angle.
Okay, because we're going to talk about this in 2 days.
We have another handle for talking about such entities from other forms of history. We call them gods. And one of the issues with talking about gods is we here in this auditorium are all intellectually children of the 18th century Enlightenment and the French Revolution with its ideas of equality being an essential characteristic of human beings. Once you admit gods, including elder gods and eldritch horrors and demons, into your worldview, you have to throw away the idea of inherent equality or equivalence of human life and its merit. And this does bring you both into connection with the Singularity and into the realm of horror. This is why what I've realised after a while was that the Laundry series is the saga of the Lovecraftian Singularity.
Yep.
Yep. And yeah, there is an intersection between the two areas. On the other hand, we can also say that stories of artificial intelligence or intelligent computers are an alternative metaphor for the alien, and the alien in science fiction is a metaphor for strange foreign people with languages we don't understand, and also an interface with our gut-level xenophobia. See also Howard Phillips Lovecraft. And all of this stuff does sort of mesh and intermingle at a thematic level.
Actually, tying into what you just said, someone here mentioned cyberpunk. On the face of it, it would not seem like Lovecraftian and cyberpunk are similar genres of horror. But if you set aside the surface characteristics, just add tentacles, and try to go to like the core issues, they are both stories about the people feeling like insects in a world in which they have no control. So there's actually a great similarity between them. It's just that the cyberpunk, to some people, is more horrifying because it is so easy to see the cyberpunk dystopia in which we live.
Yeah, they're both genres that rely on dehumanization. In the case of cyberpunk, it's dehumanization compared to artificial intelligences and corporations. In Lovecraft, it's compared to ancient elder gods from beyond space-time. You could approach it either way, and if I remember correctly, the Shadowrun role-playing game pretty much covers both angles. Yeah. You've got magic and computer tech.
But my question is, can you make the Lovecraftian type mythos more relevant to the present day? Like in cyberpunk, the real villains are not the machines, they're the people who built them, the people who controlled them. Can you do that with the Lovecraftian myth? Is it possible to humanize the inhuman?
Yes. All you do is have the inhuman using a flayed human skin as a sock puppet to talk to your characters. Not literally as a sock puppet. It looks like a human being. It's perfectly charming. It walks, it talks, it drinks a beer with you. And then something creeps out from it behind its eyes and you recognize the inhumanity there. Although whether you need to do this, given how inhumane we are to each other anyways, a moot point.
So that would seem to be the major distinction, whether the inhumanity is an inherently human trait.
I've got a novel that actually speaks to this sort of concern, only it comes out next June. It's the 8th laundry novel. But I don't want to spoiler it by explaining how it does this.
Okay. I want to talk about the stories about...
Please speak up.
Okay. I want to talk about the stories about the psychological stories, the stories when the monster is in your mind, and because we all love the dark fantasy stories when you have demons and monsters that follow you and can tear you apart. But what about the monsters in your mind the more, how do I call it, crazy people.
Yes, that sounds like a question for a panel about psychological thrillers or serial killers, which this is not. That also wasn't a question.
But also go read Daryl Gregory.
Yeah. Yes, definitely read We Are All Completely Fine. Spoiler, they are not completely fine.
Wow. Really? I have a basic question, but I'm surprised you didn't raise. Why are you writing horror stories? Why did you decide to add the horror tone to your stories? Because as you said, you could remove the horror and it would still be the same novel. So
you don't want to hear the answer to this question, but I'll give it you anyway. I do it because it's fun.
Okay.
Do you really want me to overanalyze my creative process so I can't do it anymore?
No. The answer to your question is no.
I again forgot my question.
Write them down.
Yes.
You don't have paper.
So,
Thank you.
Maybe this was answered before, but my question is, and I'm going to make a quick comparison here, so just don't switch me immediately. When it comes to horror and dark fantasy, there's a lot of stuff like, say for example, Warhammer 40K and stuff like that, where they just go full blow up.
There's a lot of stuff like what?
Warhammer
40K. Okay.
Yeah.
That was
where they just go
really
full
quick.
bombastic with gore and shit. This truly disgustingly vile stuff that they write and stuff that you guys mentioned, etc., etc.
The fascism of the good guys.
And then of course there's also, and then there's like the horror, which is like very subtle and very creepy, just like you said, when there's this sock puppet which talks to you and it wears human skin, and then just something creeps out of its ear. And my question is like, why do we see more and more of this? Not what do we see. What do you think is more an embodiment of horror? Just the extremely catharsis and just insanely gory stuff. When you just pile up on more and more and more of the psychotic the situation gets, or is it just the more like very subtle, very quiet, very slow stuff, and then just something just pops out of you?
Actually, William Burroughs came up with a metaphor that I think is perfect for horror and how to define it. Title of one of his novels, The Naked Lunch. The Naked Lunch is that moment when everyone looks at what is on their end of their fork as they're about to put it in their mouth and recognises and understands everything about it. It's the moment when you stop, look at the piece of steak on the end of your fork and see it from the cow's point of view.
It's the moment when you take an awful lot of drugs and I'll kill your wife.
If I can go back to I think we had a wonderful example just recently with Stranger Things. And when I was watching it, I didn't like it, by the way. I thought it was boring. And but all through the time when I was watching it, I kept comparing to Coraline. You've got the things in the walls, and you've got the other side. But in Coraline, it's done in finesse, and it's much more frightening than just the monster coming after you and leaving just blood behind. So I think.
It's just that like the comparison I wanted to game is they make it more to video games. It's the comparison between something like Doom and Silent Hill, just something which is very bombastic and in your face. And we see more and more of that. Just people keep shoving more and more.
Because it's impressive. Listen,
we see both.
I think I have an answer to him. We see more of it because it sells.
We see both. I'm not a huge fan of which of these two different kinds of that thing is better. The answer is the one that's better done.
Also, if you look at it, only last year there was a horror movie which was pretty successful called It Follows. Yes. And nothing out of that was there. It was very finesse, nothing scary, nothing gory. It was all about camera movements and characters thinking that someone is following them.
I don't watch horror movies, so I didn't watch It Follows, but how is it horror if there's nothing scary?
Oh, by implication.
Oh, by implication. How is Psycho scary if there's nothing going on the screen and nothing is going on the screen?
Scary.
Let me add, I haven't seen It Follows, but I can understand implicitly why it's terrifying, is because we are primates. We are the end product of a long evolutionary selection process that killed off all of our ancestors who didn't notice when they were being followed by a lion. We're highly attuned to notice when something is following us and stalking us, and we don't like it.
Because I really don't know much about
also,
it all,
It Follows. It's not just It Follows, it's It Follows.
How about Ex Machina, the movie?
Wait. It? Like from Pennywise Follows?
That's all.
Yeah, look, the scary clowns are, until it comes to a head, whatever it is that's going on, that's, yeah, we're probably going to have to keep bringing them up because they're scaring me.
It's going to turn out to be trying to sell you something.
Yeah, but, you know, the whole clown thing, yeah, clowns do scare kids. And the thing about clowns is that what is amusing and what is scary changes over time. There's a near future novel I wrote where I had to leave a bit out that I wanted to get in, but there was a scene I wanted to put in for colour set, circa 2030. A couple of protagonists have gone to a circus, and the clown show comes on, and the clowns run on in their clown car, and they blow. No, it's not a clown car; it's a clown airliner, and they run on holding the fuselage up, and then their shoes explode, then their underpants explode, then the wings fall off. Think about it.
Yeah.
Then it finally crashes into the other clown wearing a large box meant to be the World Trade Center. And you just know that in 10 years' time somebody will be doing this at a big top.
Yeah. Yeah,
we laugh at what frightens us.
We do, except, you know, for me, I don't find clowns funny.
Think about catastrophe.
I do find it dark.
Think about catastrophe movies or science fiction catastrophe movies like ID4, Independence Day. Those movies are so successful partly because you see all those big things, familiar big things, like White House or World Trade Center, not in the movie, in the real world, explode. 9/11 was very successful as a TV show because you couldn't take your eyes off it. First time I saw it on CNN live and I didn't know what was going on, I thought, wow, CNN is showing Die Hard? Since when? Took time for me to realize that this was real.
Yeah, I was watching it live as it ploughed on for about an hour. At one point, I phoned my sister, who was wandering around shopping in a town nearby. She pretty much hung up on me and said, "Don't be bloody silly, you're describing a movie or something."
They were asking, I saw an interview once a while ago with, I don't think it was the mayor of New York, but maybe it was one of his deputies, about why do you close the streets and let people and disrupt daily life in order for people to shoot basically your town being destroyed over and over again, and why do you do this? And the guy said, because tourists come to see these places.
I can tell you that about 15, 20 years ago, I was in Los Angeles and I went into a movie that just came out. It was a really bad movie. It was called Volcano. And it was about the volcano erupting in the center of Los Angeles. It was really, really bad. The crowd in the theater, which was in Los Angeles, was cheering.
Yeah. Also, I went to see Independence Day. It's probably one of the last movie I ever saw in a cinema. But I went to see it in a cinema, and I swear, I saw this in a cinema in the UK, in particular in Scotland, and let's just say the audience were cheering at points that the movie's cinematographers and directors hadn't intended. The bit where the White House gets zapped by the aliens, standing ovation. George W. Bush was president at the time.
Yeah. Remember when George W. Bush was the darkest image of a US president you could think of?
You're supporting Hillary Clinton now.
Every person ever to serve president or run for it for a major party who's still alive supports her.
I want to see what, I'd like to see Bill Hicks talk about Trump. That would be
But apparently George W. Bush is supporting Hillary in this one. He's terrified of a Trump victory. I mean, I've still got the bumper stickers from 2004 saying, you know, vote Cthulhu, why settle for the lesser evil?
Yeah. I'm not sure Trump is the lesser evil. Certainly his followers aren't. But yeah, that's dark reality, not dark horror. You've been writing your question, right?
Yes. About kid stories, that especially
speak up a little bit.
About kid stories, especially Disney, can very, very be frightening.
Can what? Can be very frightening. Okay. Sorry, you're one.
That they are so manipulative. And it's amazing how easily they're doing it. Another thing is Pokemon. It is amazing how the producers make it so easy to see animal abuse in it. They just should put they just should put before they see the show the sorry, I didn't really think this down. How do you think down something? Think it through. I am very confused.
It's okay. I think you speak for us all.
Basically, they're doing something that kids can't understand, and adults will understand.
There's a reason for that.
And it's amazing how many times. And Pokemon, which is all about animal abuse.
It's not. They're not animals.
They're living beings. That's even worse.
Living beings trapped in your computers. The reason for the movies that have stuff that kids can understand, but also stuff that's fair for the adults. Who buys the tickets? Answer: the adults, the parents, or the child sitter, or whatever. So they've got to keep the adults amused at the same time.
How is this amusing? I can't understand.
Well, it's not about amusement. Well, it's to keep the adults going there, to take the kids there, so they'll pay all their money. It's all about money. Let's be cynical about it.
As a publisher who publishes a lot of YA books, I can tell you that I have to appeal to the parents too.
Both when they buy for themselves and when they buy for the kids.
Hell, as an author, I have to appeal to my editors as well as my readers.
They have kids.
I think we can take a point from there that if you look at Disney, there is a Stockholm syndrome there at Beauty and the Beast. And if you look at the Pokemon, you do have animal cruelty there, and you can't. I mean, I can think of if we take the sound out of it and put to sound some of the things, and we watch it without the happy flapping birds, we can see the horror in it. So it's there are some things
as has already been discussed, the underlying fairy tales for all those early Disney movies are incredibly dark and were at points even darker. Michael,
not really a question, just even with Narnia, I can't think of anything more horrible than spending decades as an adult in Narnia and then going back to my home, to my world, and becoming a child again. That's like
Oh hell, you've just given me the hook for a story I've got to go and write sometime. A Told from the Shoulder, straight sequel to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, set after they come home. It's probably been done.
Okay.
Explain Susan for real.
We're going to have Okay, 2 more questions. I'm going to start with you.
I was wondering, do each of you have a series or a book that is the epitome of dark fantasy?
Okay, I'm not going to say epitome because that's a current. You know what? Let me turn that around into a current recommendation of. I know you have an issue with that question, Charlie, because you said you don't read stuff that's similar to your own, but.
Well, there's a couple of things I'd recommend if you're looking for dark fantasy or relatively grim. One is The Traitor by Seth Dickinson, aka The Traitor Baruch Cormac. Yeah. It's a very political novel. It's extremely harrowing and painful. It's a secondary world fantasy novel, and its protagonist is a young accountant.
Yep.
And it's utterly terrifying by implication.
It's a book I bought when it was published, and I have not yet read it. And the reason is that everyone who raves about it also goes on at length about how much time they spent in the fetal position after finishing reading it, and I'm literally afraid of it.
I've got a couple of other recommendations as well. One I've already mentioned, it's The Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman, which takes Narnia and Harry Potter out behind the bike shed and clubs them to death with a baseball bat with rusty nails spiked through it. And the final recommendation, a series of books by a young American writer called Max Gladstone that start with Three Parts Dead.
Just published it a few weeks ago.
Met Berubo, in Hebrew, please all buy it. It's a second book published by Nova Press. I did not tell him this.
Fine. It's another secondary world fantasy set in a world where magic works. It's based on the exchange of tiny bits of your soul, and there's an entire economy and an ecosystem based on magic, and ultimately it's corporate economics, macroeconomics, fractional reserve banking with souls, and sorcerers. Well, let's just say they bear an awful resemblance to corporate attorneys.
Yes, do you know
but
what,
not in a good way.
Do you know what Steph Neely, Max's wife, does for a living?
Yep. I know, that's where he got the idea.
Yes, Steph is a corporate copyright attorney, which,
The first novel opens with a god being declared bankrupt, following some soul
AKA
speculation, and the liquidators are called in.
Yeah. I'm going to give 2 recommendations of my own. The first one is The Fifth Season, by N.K. Jemisin, by Nora Jemisin.
Going to be published by me.
Yes, that Ronnie will be publishing next year.
And you just took one of my recommendations.
It's very dark fantasy. It is nothing like anything you've read, in my opinion. It won the Hugo, and even though I was rooting for Uprooted because I'm publishing it, I think it's a fair call. Because Uprooted won the Nebula, I think it's fair for Fifth Season to have taken the Hugo.
Oh yeah, and actually Uprooted was one of the things I was going to recommend but forgot.
Yes, the third Nova Press book. Out today, digital formats. So yeah, my second is the stories of Elisa Wong. Elisa Wong is.
Why are you just taking stuff down?
Yeah, Elisa Wong is a young Asian American author of.
Go read Starving Daughters of Hungry Mothers.
You can find it in Hebrew on the Society's website.
It's an excellent story.
It's Hungry Mother. Hungry Daughters of Starving Mothers.
That's what I said.
No. Also, The Fisher Queen. Also, pretty much any story that has by Elisa Wong on it is pretty much guaranteed to be incredible.
And I would also recommend anything by Darren Gregory, especially We're All Completely Fine, but any of his short stories too. I think Damascus.
Damascus.
Yeah.
Damascus, second. Damascus, second person present tense. There's a story called Dead Horse Point, which I reread a while ago, and I started reading it and I didn't remember it, and then in the middle of it I remembered what it was and I just started crying because it's an amazing story. And I'll go a little bit further, I'll go back to Coraline, which is a book that every now and again I read, which is, to my mind, one of the best dark fantasies I ever read.
Yeah, but you know, let's stick more current.
I was going to talk about Fifth Season and Elisa Wong. And again, Daryl Gregory.
Now, I think we're pretty much out of time. Yeah. We were just given the red light of stop.
I would like to thank our panelists. And I would like to thank you all for coming. We'll be back.